The first gunshot nearly parted Delilah Larson's hair as she ducked behind a water trough, her heart pounding like a runaway locomotive. It was 1879 in Abiquiu, New Mexico, and she'd just become the most hunted woman in the territory, all because she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have. "Find her," a gruff voice bellowed from somewhere nearby. "Rutherford wants her dead by sundown." Delilah pressed her back against the rough wooden slats of the trough, the sound of approaching boots sending ice through her veins. 3 days ago, she'd been nothing more than the town schoolteacher. Now she was running for her life from the most powerful rancher in the county, Samuel Rutherford, whose men had orders to put a bullet in her head. Her crime: witnessing Rutherford shoot the county marshal in cold blood over a land dispute. She peered around the edge of the trough, seeing 2 of Rutherford's men approaching. Delilah had nowhere to run. The livery stable was across an open stretch of road, and the general store was too far in the other direction. She closed her eyes, silently praying for a miracle. The miracle came in the form of a tall figure who appeared seemingly from nowhere. He moved with the quiet precision of a mountain lion, stepping behind the first of Rutherford's men and pressing a revolver to his back. "Drop it," he said, his voice low and steady. The second man spun, drawing his gun, but the stranger was faster. A single shot rang out and the man fell, clutching his shoulder. "I suggest you boys clear out," the stranger said, "unless you're particularly eager to meet your maker today." The wounded man staggered to his feet, helping his disarmed companion. "Rutherford's gonna kill you for this," he spat. "He can take a number," the stranger replied, watching them retreat before turning his attention to Delilah. She stood shakily, getting her first clear look at her rescuer. He was tall and lean, with eyes the color of a summer storm and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat. His face was weathered from the sun, but she guessed him to be no more than 30. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Patrick Lawson, I reckon you might need some assistance." Delilah brushed dust from her skirt, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite her circumstances. "Delilah Larson. And yes, Mr. Lawson, I believe I do." "Best we get moving," Patrick said, glancing around. "Those 2 will be back with friends before long." "Why did you help me?" Delilah asked, hurrying to keep pace with his long strides as he led her toward the livery. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Let's just say Samuel Rutherford and I have a history, and I don't much care for men who hunt women through the streets." Inside the livery, Patrick quickly saddled 2 horses. "Can you ride?" he asked, eyeing her long skirts. "I grew up on a small farm outside of Denver," she replied. "I can ride." He nodded approvingly, handing her the reins to a chestnut mare. "We'll head north into the mountains. I've got a cabin there where you'll be safe until we figure out what to do about your predicament." "And what exactly is my predicament, Mr. Lawson?" Delilah asked, though she already knew the answer. "You saw something you weren't supposed to see," he replied, swinging into his saddle. "And Samuel Rutherford doesn't leave witnesses." Delilah mounted the mare with practiced ease despite her unsuitable attire. "I saw him murder Marshal Coleman, shot him right in the back over that parcel of land with the spring." Patrick's jaw tightened. "Coleman was a good man." "He was," Delilah agreed, thinking of the kind marshal who had walked her home after school whenever the weather turned foul. "And Rutherford will get away with it unless I testify. The circuit judge doesn't come through for another 2 weeks." "You won't live 2 days with Rutherford's men hunting you, let alone 2 weeks," Patrick said bluntly. "Your only chance is to disappear until the judge arrives." The sound of shouting from the street reached them, and Patrick gestured toward the back of the livery. "Time to go." They rode hard, leaving Abiquiu behind in a cloud of dust, heading toward the rugged mountains that rose like sentinels to the north. Delilah glanced back only once at the town that had been her home for the past year, wondering if she would ever see it again. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they climbed higher into the foothills, following trails that seemed invisible to Delilah's untrained eye. Patrick rode with the confidence of a man who knew every rock and tree, guiding them through narrow passes and across shallow streams. "How far to this cabin of yours?" Delilah asked after they'd been riding for several hours, her body beginning to ache from the unaccustomed exertion. "Another hour or so," Patrick replied. "We'll reach it before dark." True to his word, the sun was just beginning to dip toward the horizon when they crested a ridge and Delilah saw the cabin nestled in a small clearing surrounded by pines. It was larger than she'd expected, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. "It's not much," Patrick said as they dismounted, "but it's defensible and Rutherford's men don't know about it." "It's perfect," Delilah replied sincerely. After the terror of the morning, in a place safe seemed like paradise. Patrick led the horses to a small corral adjacent to the cabin while Delilah stretched her aching muscles. The mountain air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the dusty streets of Abiquiu. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly well appointed, with a large main room containing a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with chairs, and comfortable-looking furniture. A curtained doorway led to what Delilah presumed was a bedroom. "You built this?" she asked, taking in the craftsmanship. Patrick nodded, setting down his saddlebags. "Over the course of a couple of years. It was something to do between jobs." "And what kind of jobs do you do, Mr. Lawson?" Delilah asked, suddenly aware that she'd ridden off with a complete stranger. He met her gaze directly. "A bit of everything. I was a scout for the army for a while, did some hunting and trapping. Occasionally I track bounties when the money's good." "A bounty hunter," Delilah said, trying to keep the apprehension from her voice. "Among other things," he replied. "But you needn't worry, Miss Larson. I only hunt men who deserve hunting." He moved to the fireplace, kneeling to build a fire. "You should rest. I'll prepare something to eat." Delilah sank gratefully into a chair, watching as he expertly arranged kindling and struck a match. The flames caught quickly, filling the room with warmth and golden light. "Why did you really help me, Mr. Lawson?" she asked quietly. "You said you and Rutherford have a history. What kind of history?" Patrick was silent for a long moment, staring into the growing flames. "He killed my brother," he said finally, 3 years ago. Thomas was a surveyor, working for the territorial government. He found some irregularities in Rutherford's land claims places where he'd moved boundary markers to take over prime grazing land and water rights. Delilah felt a chill despite the fire's warmth. "And Rutherford killed him for it, made it look like an accident, a fall from a cliff while surveying." Patrick's voice was flat, controlled, but she could sense the rage beneath it. "But I knew Thomas. He was too careful for that. And there were boot prints at the top of that cliff that didn't match his." "I'm sorry," Delilah said softly. Patrick nodded, standing abruptly. "I've been watching Rutherford ever since, waiting for a chance to bring him down. Your testimony might finally be what's needed." "If I live long enough to give it," Delilah said. "You will," Patrick promised, his gray eyes intense. "I'll make sure of it." He moved to a cupboard, pulling out supplies for a meal. Delilah rose to help him, and they worked together in companionable silence, preparing a simple but hearty dinner of beans, salt pork, and cornbread that Patrick mixed with practiced ease. As they ate, Delilah found herself studying her unexpected protector. There was something compelling about Patrick Lawson that went beyond his obvious physical attributes. He moved with a quiet confidence, his actions economical and precise. But there was also a sadness about him, a loneliness that called to something in her. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Larson," he said suddenly, breaking into her thoughts. "What brought a Denver farm girl to Abiquiu to teach school?" Delilah smiled faintly. "A desire for adventure, I suppose, and independence. After my parents died of the fever 2 years ago, the farm went to my older brother. He means well, but he and his wife have their own family, and I felt superfluous. So you came to the New Mexico territory alone. That takes courage, or foolishness," she replied with a self-deprecating laugh. "Sometimes I'm not sure which. But I love teaching, and when I saw the advertisement for a school teacher in Abiquiu, it seemed like fate." "And now fate has led you here," Patrick said quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, a current of understanding that made Delilah's heart beat a little faster. She looked away first, suddenly conscious of their isolation and the impropriety of their situation. "I should get some rest," she said, rising from the table. Patrick nodded. "Take the bedroom. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "Thank you, Mr. Lawson, for everything." "Patrick," he corrected. "If we're going to be sharing quarters, even temporarily, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Patrick," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her tongue. "Then I'm Delilah," he nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Good night, Delilah. Good night, Patrick." Sleep came surprisingly easily despite the day's events and the strange surroundings. The bed was comfortable, the blankets warm, and the knowledge that Patrick Lawson was keeping watch provided a sense of security Delilah hadn't expected to feel again so soon. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the main room. For a moment, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, she tensed before remembering where she was and why. Delilah rose, smoothing her rumpled clothing as best she could, and wishing she'd had the foresight to bring a change of clothes in her hasty escape. She combed her fingers through her long, dark hair, trying to make herself presentable before stepping through the curtained doorway. Patrick was at the stove, his back to her. He'd removed his coat and gun belt, and in his shirt sleeves, the breadth of his shoulders was even more apparent. "Good morning," she said. He turned, coffee pot in hand. "Morning, hope you slept well." "Better than I expected to, thank you." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing one to her. "I need to go into town today." Delilah nearly choked on her coffee. "Into town?" "But Rutherford's men will be looking for you, not me," Patrick finished. "At least not specifically. I need to find out what they know, how wide they're casting their net. And you need supplies, food, clothing, whatever else might make you comfortable here." The thought of being left alone in the cabin sent a flutter of panic through her, but Delilah pushed it down. She wasn't a child to be frightened of shadows. "Of course, that makes sense." "I'll be back before dark," Patrick promised. "The cabin is secure. Keep the door barred, and there's a rifle over the fireplace if you need it." Delilah nodded, though the thought of using a rifle was nearly as unsettling as being left alone. Growing up on a farm, she knew how to shoot, but she'd never fired a gun at another person and wasn't sure she could if the need arose. "What should I do while you're gone?" she asked. "Rest. Recover from yesterday." Patrick hesitated, then added, "There are some books on the shelf if you get bored. Not many, but a few." The consideration touched her. "Thank you." After a simple breakfast, Patrick prepared to leave, checking his guns and saddling his horse with efficient movements. Delilah watched from the doorway, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread at his departure. "Remember, keep the door barred," he reminded her, mounting his horse. "I will. Be careful in town." He nodded, tipping his hat before riding away. Delilah watched until he disappeared among the trees before closing and barring the door as instructed. The day stretched before her, long and empty. She explored the cabin more thoroughly, finding it simple but remarkably comfortable. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection, a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets, a well-worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans, several books on natural history and geology, and, surprisingly, a collection of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Delilah ran her fingers over the leather spine of the poetry book, wondering about the man who had assembled such a diverse library in this remote cabin. Patrick Lawson was clearly more than the hardened bounty hunter he appeared to be. She spent the morning reading, then busied herself by tidying the already neat cabin and preparing a stew from the supplies Patrick had left. As the day wore on, she found herself going repeatedly to the window, scanning the trees for any sign of his return. The shadows lengthened, and still Patrick did not return. Delilah's anxiety grew with each passing hour. Had he been captured? Killed? Did Rutherford's men somehow know about the cabin after all? She was pacing the floor, debating what to do if he didn't return by nightfall, when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Grabbing the rifle from over the fireplace, she moved to the window, her heart pounding. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Patrick, but it was short-lived. He was riding hard, and even from a distance, she could tell something was wrong. Forgetting his instructions to keep the door barred, she flung it open and rushed outside. As he drew closer, she saw the dark stain on his shirt and the grim set of his jaw. "You're hurt," she cried as he dismounted, nearly stumbling. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said, but his face was pale beneath his tan, and he leaned heavily on her as she helped him into the cabin. "What happened?" Delilah asked, guiding him to a chair and helping him remove his coat. "Ran into some of Rutherford's men at the general store," Patrick replied, wincing as she eased his shirt away from a long, bloody gash on his upper arm. "They were asking questions about you. When I left, they followed me to the edge of town. They shot you?" Delilah asked, gathering clean cloths and water to tend his wound. Patrick shook his head. "Not exactly. I evaded them, doubled back to make sure I wasn't followed here. But I got careless, rode too close to a ravine in the dark. Branch caught my arm when I passed under a tree." Delilah gave him a skeptical look but didn't press the issue. Instead, she focused on cleaning the wound, which was indeed long but thankfully not deep. "What did you learn in town?" she asked, partly to distract him from the pain as she worked. Patrick's expression darkened. "Rutherford's offering $100 for information leading to your capture. He's got men watching the roads and checking every farm and homestead within 20 miles of Abiquiu." Delilah's hand stilled. "He's that determined to silence me." "He knows his neck is on the line," Patrick said grimly. "Your testimony would send him to the gallows. Did anyone in town recognize you, connect you to me? I don't think so. I've kept to myself since coming to this area. Most folks in Abiquiu know me only as a trapper who comes in occasionally for supplies." Delilah nodded, resuming her ministrations. "We're safe here then." For now, Patrick agreed, "but we need to be ready to move if necessary." She finished bandaging his arm, her fingers lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary on his sun-warmed skin. "There. That should do." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition of their shared danger creating a bond that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a heartbeat, Delilah thought Patrick might lean forward, might close the small distance between them, but instead he drew back, clearing his throat. "I managed to get some supplies before the trouble started," he said, nodding toward the saddlebags he dropped by the door. "There's a dress and some other necessities for you in there." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Delilah retrieved the saddlebags, finding not only a simple but practical dress, but also a hairbrush, soap, and other personal items that would make her stay more comfortable. "Thank you," she said softly. That was very considerate. Patrick looked almost embarrassed by her gratitude. It was nothing. I asked the shopkeeper what a lady might need if she was traveling. His wife helped. Still, it was kind of you to think of it, Delilah insisted. She paused, then asked, "Will you tell me more about your brother? About Thomas?" A shadow passed over Patrick's face, but after a moment he nodded. Thomas was the scholar in the family, 4 years older than me. Our parents scraped together enough money to send him to university back east, where he studied engineering and surveying. "And you?" Delilah asked. Patrick smiled faintly. "I was more at home on the back of a horse than behind a desk. When the war came, I joined up despite being too young. Lied about my age. By the time it was over, I'd seen enough killing to last a lifetime. Yet you became a bounty hunter." "For a time," he acknowledged. "It was a way to use the skills I'd learned. And I told myself I was bringing criminals to justice, not just killing for a cause I barely understood." Delilah studied him thoughtfully. "What brought you to New Mexico?" "Thomas," Patrick replied. "He'd taken a position with the territorial government, surveying land claims. He wrote to me about the beauty of the place, the opportunities. Said there was room here for a man to breathe." His voice grew softer, tinged with memory. "We were going to start a ranch together, once he'd saved enough from his government work. He'd found this piece of land not far from here, actually. Good water, good grass, a place to put down roots. And then Rutherford killed him," Delilah said gently. Patrick nodded, his expression hardening. "I arrived 2 weeks after they buried him. The local authorities had already ruled it an accident. No one wanted to question the verdict, not with Rutherford's influence in the territory. So you stayed, waiting for a chance to prove what he'd done." "I stayed," Patrick confirmed. "Built this cabin, took whatever work came my way. And watched Rutherford. The man's got blood on his hands going back years, settlers who refused to sell their land, competitors who challenged his authority, anyone who stood in his way. Including Marshal Coleman," Delilah said. "Coleman was investigating some of the accidents that benefited Rutherford. Must have gotten too close to the truth." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Rutherford's crimes hanging between them. Finally, Delilah spoke. "We have to stop him. Not just for Thomas and Marshal Coleman, but for everyone else who might cross his path." Patrick looked at her with newfound respect. "It won't be easy, and it will be dangerous." "I'm already in danger," Delilah pointed out. "At least this way my risk serves a purpose." A slow smile spread across Patrick's face, transforming his features. "You're a remarkable woman, Delilah Larson." She felt warmth rise to her cheeks at his praise. "I'm simply doing what's right." "Many people wouldn't," Patrick replied. "They'd run as far and as fast as they could from Rutherford and his troubles." "Would you?" she challenged. "No," he admitted. "But then I have my own reasons for wanting to see Rutherford fall." Delilah rose, moving to the stove where the stew she'd prepared earlier was simmering. "You should eat, regain your strength. We'll need clear heads to plan our next move." They ate together, discussing possibilities. The circuit judge would arrive in 13 days. Until then, Delilah needed to remain hidden, alive, and ready to testify. "What if Rutherford tries to flee before the judge arrives?" she asked. "Once he realizes I've evaded his men, he might decide to run rather than risk being brought to justice." Patrick considered this. "It's possible, but Rutherford spent years building his empire here. He won't abandon it easily. More likely he'll double his efforts to find you." The thought sent a chill through her. "How long can we stay here safely?" "A few days at least," Patrick replied. "I made sure I wasn't followed, but eventually we'll need to move. I know several places in the mountains where we can stay temporarily." "Moving from place to place for 2 weeks," Delilah said, trying to keep the weariness from her voice. Patrick reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. "I know it's not an easy path. But I promise you, Delilah, I will keep you safe until you can testify." The sincerity in his eyes and the warm pressure of his hand on hers caused a flutter in Delilah's chest that had nothing to do with fear. She turned her hand over, her fingers curling around his. "I believe you," she said softly. For 3 days they remained at the cabin, settling into an unexpected domesticity that belied the danger waiting beyond the clearing. Delilah found herself watching Patrick as he moved about the cabin, admiring the quiet strength in his movements and the intelligence in his gray eyes. He, in turn, seemed to find reasons to be near her, bringing her wildflowers he'd gathered while checking the perimeter, asking her opinion on passages from the books they both read in the evenings, listening with genuine interest as she spoke about her students in Abiquiu. On the 4th morning, Patrick returned from checking his snares with a grim expression. "We have company," he said without preamble. "Riders about 2 miles east, 4 of them moving this way." Delilah's heart raced. "Rutherford's men, how did they find us?" "I don't know," Patrick replied, already gathering essentials into a pack. "But we need to move. Now." They worked quickly, taking only what was necessary: food, water, a change of clothing, weapons. Within 15 minutes, they were mounted and moving west into rougher terrain, following game trails that would be difficult to track. "Where are we going?" Delilah asked, keeping her voice low despite the distance they'd already put between themselves and the cabin. "There's an old mining shack about 10 miles from here," Patrick replied. "We can shelter there tonight, then decide our next move." They rode hard for several hours, the terrain growing increasingly difficult. Delilah was grateful for her upbringing on the farm. The riding skills she'd learned there were serving her well now. By midday, they reached a small stream where they stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and dried fruit. "How do you think they found the cabin?" Delilah asked, the question that had been nagging at her since their hasty departure. Patrick's expression was troubled. "I've been asking myself the same thing. Either they got lucky, searching the area systematically, or someone told them where to look," Delilah finished. "But who knew we were there?" "No one," Patrick said firmly, "unless—" His face darkened. "The shopkeeper's wife. She was asking a lot of questions about who the supplies were for. You think she connected you to me, to my disappearance? It's possible. Or maybe she just mentioned to someone that I'd bought women's things. In a small town like Abiquiu, that kind of gossip travels fast." Delilah sighed, gazing at the clear water of the stream. "I never realized being a witness to murder would be so complicated." Despite the gravity of their situation, Patrick laughed, a warm, rich sound that Delilah found herself wanting to hear again. "Most things worth doing are complicated," he said. They continued their journey after the brief rest, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, the pine forests denser. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering, promising rain. "There," Patrick said, pointing to a dilapidated structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. "The mining shack." It was smaller and far less comfortable than Patrick's cabin, a single room with a sagging roof, broken windows, and a rusty stove that looked like it hadn't been used in years. But it offered shelter from the impending storm, and its position against the rocks made it defensible. They'd barely gotten the horses sheltered in a lean-to adjacent to the shack when the rain began, a steady downpour that would erase any tracks they'd left. A small mercy, Delilah thought, as Patrick worked to get a fire going in the old stove. "It's not much," he said apologetically, looking around the cramped space, "but it should keep us dry for the night." "It's perfect," Delilah assured him, though perfect was far from the truth. Still, they were alive and together, which was all that really mattered at the moment. The stove finally caught, providing some warmth and light as the day faded into evening. They ate another cold meal, saving their limited firewood for the night ahead, which promised to be chilly at this elevation. As darkness fell, the rain intensified, drumming on the roof and finding its way through several small leaks. Patrick moved their bedrolls to avoid the worst of the dripping water, but the options were limited in the small space. "You should take the drier spot," he said, gesturing to a corner where the roof seemed most intact. "And leave you to catch your death sleeping in a puddle," Delilah replied. "I think not." Patrick looked amused. "I've slept in worse conditions, I assure you." "As have I," Delilah countered. "Growing up on a farm, I spent many nights in barns and stables during calving season. A schoolteacher who can ride, shoot, and sleep in barns," Patrick said with a smile. "You continue to surprise me, Delilah Larson." "There's more to most people than first appears," she replied, returning his smile. "Even mysterious bounty hunters who read poetry." Their eyes met in the dim light, and something shifted between them, a tension that had been building since their first meeting. Patrick took a step toward her, then stopped, his expression conflicted. "We should get some rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Delilah nodded, trying to ignore the faint disappointment that fluttered in her chest. They arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the small room, but in the confined space, they were still closer than they had been in the cabin. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain and Patrick's steady breathing, wondering what he might have done if he hadn't stopped himself. When sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with gray eyes and gentle hands. Morning brought clear skies and a difficult decision. The mining shack, while remote, wasn't secure enough for a prolonged stay, especially if Rutherford's men were actively searching the mountains. "We have two options," Patrick said as they shared a breakfast of hardtack and dried beef. "We can keep moving, staying in different locations each night until the judge arrives, or, Delilah prompted when he hesitated, "or we can try to reach Socorro," Patrick continued. "It's about a 3-day ride from here, but there's a U.S. Marshal's office there. You could give your testimony to them, have it officially recorded. Even if something happened to you before the circuit judge arrives, your statement would still stand." The implication that she might not live to testify in person hung heavy in the air. "You think that's a real possibility, don't you?" Delilah asked quietly. Patrick met her gaze directly. "I think Rutherford is desperate, and desperate men are unpredictable. Going to Socorro would be dangerous. We'd have to travel more openly on established trails. But staying in these mountains for another 10 days carries its own risks." Delilah considered their options. The smart choice was clear. "Socorro," she said decisively. "If my testimony is what will bring Rutherford to justice, then ensuring it's heard is the priority, even if I'm not the one to deliver it in person." Pride flashed in Patrick's eyes. "You're a brave woman, Delilah." "Not brave," she corrected. "Just determined. Rutherford has killed too many people. It has to stop." They set out within the hour, taking a southeasterly route that would eventually connect with the main trail to Socorro. The terrain was rugged but breathtaking, towering pines, dramatic rock formations, and occasional meadows carpeted with wildflowers still sparkling with morning dew. Under different circumstances, Delilah would have reveled in the natural beauty surrounding them. But the constant vigilance required by their situation kept her tense, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. By midday, they had reached a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. Patrick reined in his horse, studying the landscape with narrowed eyes. "Something wrong?" Delilah asked, pulling up beside him. Not sure, he replied. Just being cautious. From here, we'll need to descend into that valley, then follow the river for several miles before climbing again. It's the easiest route, but also the most obvious one. Delilah understood his concern. Is there an alternative? Patrick gestured to their right, where the ridge continued in a series of steep switchbacks. We could follow the high ground. It would add several hours to our journey, but we'd have better visibility, less chance of being ambushed. The high ground, then, Delilah decided. I'd rather arrive in Socorro late than not at all. Patrick nodded approvingly, and they urged their horses forward along the ridge. The path was treacherous in places, forcing them to dismount and lead the animals through particularly narrow or rocky sections. By late afternoon, Delilah's muscles were aching from the exertion, but she pushed through the discomfort without complaint. They had made good progress, covering nearly 20 miles of difficult terrain. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Patrick led them to a small clearing sheltered by a circle of boulders. "We'll camp here," he said. "The rocks will hide our fire, and we'll have good sight lines in all directions." They made camp efficiently, working together with the ease of longtime partners rather than recent acquaintances. As darkness fell, they sat close to the small fire, sharing the last of the coffee Patrick had brought from the cabin. "Tell me about your life before Abiquiu," Patrick said suddenly. "What was it like growing up on that farm near Denver?" Delilah smiled, warmed by his interest in her past. "It was a good life, simple but fulfilling. My father was a kind man, devoted to his family and his land. My mother was strong, capable. She could do anything from delivering a calf to making the finest pies in the county. And your brother, the one who inherited the farm. James is a good man too, cut from the same cloth as our father. He and his wife, Sarah, have 3 children now." Her smile turned wistful. "I miss them, the children especially. I was teaching them their letters before I left for Abiquiu." "Do you regret coming here?" Patrick asked. Delilah considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Despite everything that's happened, I don't regret it. I've grown in ways I never would have on the farm, and I've met people I never would have known otherwise." Her eyes met his across the fire. "People worth knowing." Something intense flared in Patrick's gaze, but he looked away, poking at the fire with a stick. "After all this is over, what will you do? Return to Abiquiu? Go back to Denver?" It was a question Delilah had been asking herself. "I don't know," she admitted. "I love teaching, and I'd like to continue if possible, but I'm not sure Abiquiu will feel like home anymore, not after this." "You could teach anywhere," Patrick pointed out. "Towns all over the territory are looking for educated women willing to take on the role." "True," Delilah agreed. "What about you? After Rutherford faces justice for your brother's death, what then?" Patrick was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he said finally. "For 3 years, bringing Rutherford down has been my only goal." "But surely you've had dreams beyond that," Delilah pressed gently. "The ranch you and Thomas plan to start together, would you still want that?" "Maybe," Patrick said, his voice soft with memory. "The land is still there. It would be a fitting tribute to Thomas, I suppose, to build the life we plan together." "It sounds wonderful," Delilah said sincerely. "A place of your own, room to breathe, as you said Thomas described it." Their eyes met again, and this time Patrick didn't look away. "It would be a good life," he agreed, "but a lonely one." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Delilah's heart beat a little faster as Patrick set aside his coffee cup and moved to sit beside her on the log she'd claimed as a seat. "Delilah," he began, his voice low and serious. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but the crack of a rifle shot cut through the night, sending them both diving for cover. Patrick rolled, coming up with his revolver drawn, his body positioned protectively in front of Delilah. "Stay down," he whispered urgently as a second shot splintered the log where they'd been sitting moments before. Delilah pressed herself against the earth, her heart pounding. "How many?" she whispered back. "At least 2, maybe more," Patrick replied, scanning the darkness beyond their small camp. "They're up on the ridge about 100 yards to the east." Another shot rang out, closer this time, suggesting their attackers were moving in. Patrick fired back, aiming at the muzzle flash visible in the darkness. "We need to move," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "When I say go, head for the horses. Stay low." Delilah nodded, gathering herself for the dash across the exposed clearing. The horses were tethered on the opposite side, partially concealed by the circle of boulders. Patrick fired twice more, providing cover. "Go," he hissed. Delilah ran, crouching low, her heart in her throat. A bullet whizzed past her ear as she reached the horses, which were stamping nervously at the gunfire. She quickly untied them, preparing to mount. Patrick appeared beside her, his face grim in the faint moonlight. "They're trying to circle around behind us," he said, swinging onto his horse. "We need to break east, through their line, while we still can." It was a dangerous plan, but Delilah saw no alternatives. They mounted quickly and urged their horses forward, breaking from the shelter of the boulders at a gallop. Gunfire erupted around them as they charged through the darkness. Delilah kept her head down, trusting her horse and following Patrick's lead. A bullet grazed her arm, the sudden pain causing her to gasp, but she maintained her seat and kept riding. They plunged into the forest beyond the clearing, the dense trees providing some cover from their pursuers. Behind them, Delilah could hear shouts and the sound of horses giving chase. "This way," Patrick called, veering sharply to the right. They rode along a narrow game trail, branches whipping past their faces in the darkness. The path led steeply downhill, forcing their horses to pick their way carefully despite the urgency of their flight. The sounds of pursuit gradually faded, suggesting their attackers had either lost their trail or chosen a different route in hopes of cutting them off. Either way, the reprieve was welcome. After nearly an hour of hard riding, Patrick finally signaled a halt in a small hollow beside a trickling stream. Both horses were lathered with sweat, their sides heaving from the exertion. "We should be safe here for a moment," Patrick said, dismounting and helping Delilah down. "Let me see your arm." In the faint moonlight filtering through the trees, he examined the wound on her upper arm. "It's just a graze," he said with relief, "but it should be cleaned and bandaged." Using water from the stream and a clean cloth from his saddlebag, Patrick gently tended to her injury. His touch was gentle, his face a mask of concentration. "I'm sorry," he said softly, securing the bandage. "I should have been more vigilant. They must have been tracking us all day." "This isn't your fault," Delilah insisted. "You've done nothing but protect me since the moment we met." Patrick's hand stilled on her arm, his eyes meeting hers in the darkness. "And I'll continue to do so," he promised. "But our plan needs to change. They know we're heading southeast, probably guessed we're making for Sakaro." "What do we do now?" Delilah asked. "We double back," Patrick decided. "Head northwest for a while to throw them off, then swing south through the high desert. It will add at least a day to our journey, but it might be our only chance." Delilah nodded, trusting his judgment. "How far to the next safe place to rest?" "There's an abandoned homestead about 2 hours from here," Patrick replied. "We can shelter there until dawn, then continue our journey." They remounted, Patrick leading the way through the darkness with an unerring sense of direction that Delilah found remarkable. True to his word, after about 2 hours of careful riding, the silhouette of a small building emerged from the shadows. The homestead was little more than a one-room cabin with half its roof missing, but it offered some protection from the elements and prying eyes. They led the horses inside, where they would be hidden from anyone passing by. "Get some rest," Patrick said, spreading a blanket for her in the driest corner. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Delilah argued. "We can take turns." Patrick looked like he wanted to object but finally nodded. "Wake me in 4 hours, then." Delilah sat with her back against the wall, rifle across her lap, listening to the night sounds and watching Patrick's chest rise and fall in sleep. Despite the danger they faced, she felt a curious sense of peace in his presence. Her mind returned to the moment by the fire. Before the attack, what had Patrick been about to say? The question lingered in her thoughts as the hours passed, but when it came time to wake him for his watch, she found she couldn't bring herself to disturb his much-needed rest. Instead, she maintained her vigil through the night, alert for any sign of their pursuers. By dawn, she was exhausted but satisfied that they had successfully evaded Rutherford's men, at least temporarily. Patrick woke with the first light, immediately alert. His expression changed from vigilance to concern when he realized Delilah had kept watch all night. "You should have woken me," he chided gently, rising to check their surroundings. "You needed the rest more than I did," she replied simply, "and I'm perfectly capable of keeping watch." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I don't doubt your capabilities, Delilah, but you need strength for the journey ahead." The journey proved as difficult as Patrick had predicted. They traveled northwest for most of the day, crossing rugged terrain that showed little sign of human presence. By afternoon, they had begun the wide arc that would eventually take them south toward Socorro. The landscape changed gradually, the dense pine forests giving way to juniper and piñon, and finally to the stark beauty of the high desert. The heat was intense, making Delilah grateful for the wide-brimmed hat Patrick had insisted she wear. They camped that night in a shallow cave set into a sandstone cliff, with a view that stretched for miles across the desert. No fire was risked. They ate a cold supper and prepared for another night of alternating watches. "You think we've lost them?" Delilah asked as they sat side by side at the mouth of the cave, watching the sunset paint the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. "For now," Patrick replied cautiously, "but Rutherford's men are persistent, and they know these lands almost as well as I do." "How many days until we reach Socorro?" "2, if all goes well," Patrick said. "We're making good time despite the detour." Delilah nodded, trying to ignore the fatigue that weighted her limbs after days of hard riding. "And from Socorro, how long to return to Abiquiu for the judge's arrival?" Patrick gave her a sharp look. "You're not going back to Abiquiu." "Of course I am," Delilah said, surprised by his vehemence. "My testimony will be recorded in Socorro," Patrick interrupted. "The U.S. Marshal there can escort you somewhere safe, Denver perhaps, to your brother's farm until Rutherford is dealt with." "And what about you?" Delilah asked. "Will you come with me?" Something complicated passed across Patrick's face. "My place is in Abiquiu," he said finally. "I need to see this through to the end, for Thomas." The thought of parting ways with Patrick sent an unexpected pang through Delilah's heart. In the short time they'd known each other, he had become more important to her than she wanted to admit. "I understand," she said quietly, though in truth, she did not fully. How could she return to her safe, ordinary life while Patrick continued to risk his for justice? They lapsed into silence, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. When it came time for the first watch, Patrick insisted Delilah sleep first, and this time she was too exhausted to argue. She woke several hours later to find Patrick still sitting at the mouth of the cave, his profile etched against the starlit sky. Rising quietly, she moved to sit beside him. "You should have woken me," she said softly. "It's my turn to watch." "I wasn't tired," he replied, though the faint shadows beneath his eyes suggested otherwise. "And it's peaceful here. Gives a man time to think." "And what have you been thinking about?" Delilah asked. Patrick turned to look at her, his expression serious in the starlight. "About what happens after. After Rutherford, after justice for Thomas. About whether a man like me deserves a future beyond vengeance." "Of course you do," Delilah said without hesitation. "Patrick, the things you've done, they don't define you. Your loyalty to your brother, your willingness to risk everything to protect a stranger, those are the true measure of who you are." He was silent for a long moment, searching her face as if looking for answers to questions he couldn't voice. "When I first saw you in Abiquiu," he said finally, "hiding behind that water trough with Rutherford's men closing in, I didn't step in because it was right, or because I saw an opportunity to bring Rutherford down." "Then why?" Delilah asked. "Because I couldn't bear to see you hurt," Patrick admitted quietly. "It was that simple, that immediate. And every day since then, every mile we've traveled together, I've felt the same way." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that touched Delilah deeply. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "I'm glad you did," she said softly. "Not just because you saved my life, but because it brought you into it." Patrick turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the simple contact saying more than words could express. Then Patrick leaned forward, his free hand gently cupping her cheek as his lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and questioning. Delilah responded without hesitation, her heart racing as the connection between them deepened into something profound and undeniable. When they finally parted, Patrick rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I didn't plan for this," he whispered. "For you." "Neither did I," Delilah replied, smiling in the darkness. "But I'm not sorry." They spent the remainder of the night talking softly, sharing stories of their lives before fate had thrown them together. As dawn approached, they reluctantly prepared to continue their journey, both aware that the feelings growing between them added both complication and purpose to their mission. The day's ride was long and hot, the desert landscape offering little shade or water. By mid-afternoon, heat shimmers danced across the horizon, making it difficult to distinguish real landmarks from mirages. "There's a spring about 2 miles ahead," Patrick said, his voice raspy from thirst. "We can rest there, water the horses." Delilah nodded, too parched for conversation. They pressed on, the promise of water driving them forward despite their fatigue. The spring, when they reached it, was a small oasis of green amid the arid landscape, a trickle of clear water emerging from a rocky outcropping, surrounded by a small patch of grass and a few hardy trees. They dismounted gratefully, leading the horses to drink. Delilah sank to her knees beside the spring, cupping the cool water in her hands and drinking deeply. The relief was immediate and profound. She splashed water on her face and the back of her neck, washing away the dust of their journey. Patrick filled their canteens, then joined her in the shade of the largest tree. "We should reach the main trail to Socorro by nightfall," he said. "From there, it's about a day's ride to town." "And Rutherford's men?" Delilah asked. "Do you think they're still looking for us in the mountains?" "Hard to say," Patrick replied. "They might have guessed our destination by now, might be waiting ahead. We'll need to be careful, especially as we get closer to town." They rested for an hour, allowing the horses to graze on the sparse grass before continuing their journey. As they rode, the terrain gradually became less arid, with more vegetation and signs of wildlife. By sunset, They had reached the main trail to Sakuro, a well-traveled road that would make for easier riding but also increase their chances of being seen. They decided to camp a short distance from the trail, in a hollow that offered some concealment while allowing them to observe anyone passing by. "One more day," Patrick said as they prepared a cold supper, still unwilling to risk a fire. "By this time tomorrow you'll be safe in Sakuro, your testimony recorded." Delilah studied his profile in the fading light. "And then what? You return to Abiquiu while I go to Denver." Patrick was silent for a moment, his expression troubled. "It would be safer for you," he said finally. "Until Rutherford is dealt with. And after," Delilah pressed. "After Rutherford faces justice, what then?" Patrick turned to face her, his eyes serious. "That depends," he said softly. "On what?" "On whether a schoolteacher from Denver might consider a life in New Mexico territory. On a ranch, perhaps, with a man who spent too long living for vengeance and is ready to start living for something better." Delilah's heart swelled at the implications of his words. "I think she might," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that man was someone she'd come to care for deeply, someone brave and kind and honorable." Patrick's hand found hers, his fingers warm and strong as they curled around her own. "It's too soon to make promises," he said. "We've known each other less than a week. But when this is over, when you're safe and Rutherford is facing the gallows, I'd like the chance to court you properly, Delilah Larson, to see if what's growing between us might flourish in less dangerous circumstances." Delilah smiled, squeezing his hand. "I'd like that too, Patrick Lawson." They spent the night taking turns on watch, more alert than ever as they neared their destination. Dawn found them already on the trail, pushing their tired horses toward Sakuro and the safety it promised. The landscape became increasingly populated as they approached the town's scattered homesteads, small farms, the occasional traveler on the road. Each encounter caused Patrick to tense, his hand never far from his revolver. By midday, the buildings of Sakuro appeared on the horizon, the promise of safety tantalizingly close. They urged their horses to a faster pace, eager to complete their journey. They were less than a mile from town when Patrick suddenly reined in his horse, his expression alert. "Riders coming," he said tersely. "4 of them moving fast from the east." Delilah scanned the horizon, spotting the cloud of dust that marked the approaching horsemen. "Rutherford's men, possible," Patrick replied grimly. "They could have circled around, guessed our destination." "We're so close," Delilah said, frustration evident in her voice. "We can make it to town before they reach us if we ride hard." Patrick shook his head. "They'd follow us in. Sakuro's not that big we'd be cornered, and I'm not sure the local law would be much help against Rutherford's influence." "Then what do we do?" Delilah asked, watching as the dust cloud grew larger, the riders now visible as dark specks against the landscape. Patrick's expression was resolute. "We split up," he said. "You ride for town, straight to the U.S. Marshal's office. I'll lead them away, buy you the time you need." "No," Delilah protested immediately. "It's too dangerous. There are 4 of them, Patrick." "I know these lands better than they do," Patrick insisted. "I can lose them in the hills south of here, then circle back to town. But you need to go now, while they're still far enough away that they might not spot you." Delilah could see the determination in his eyes and knew arguing would only waste precious time. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I promise," Patrick replied, leaning across to place a quick, fierce kiss on her lips. "Now go. The marshal's office is on the main street, can't miss it. Tell them everything." With a final, lingering look, Delilah urged her horse forward, riding hard toward the safety of Sakuro. She resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on the approaching town, and the testimony she needed to deliver. The streets of Socorro were busy with midday activity, people pausing to stare at the dust-covered woman riding at a gallop through their town. Delilah paid them no mind, her eyes searching for the marshal's office. She found it easily enough, just as Patrick had said, a sturdy building on the main street with the U.S. Marshal's star emblazoned on the door. Dismounting quickly, she tied her horse to the hitching post and rushed inside. The office was cool and dimly lit after the bright sunshine outside. A tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest looked up from his desk, his expression curious. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, rising to his feet. "My name is Delilah Larson," she said breathlessly. "I'm a witness to the murder of Marshal James Coleman in Abiquiu. I've ridden for days to reach you, pursued by the men who work for the murderer." The marshal's expression sharpened with interest. "Coleman? I knew him. Good man. Who killed him?" "Samuel Rutherford," Delilah replied. "The rancher from Abiquiu. I saw him shoot Marshal Coleman in the back over a land dispute. Rutherford's men have been trying to kill me ever since to prevent me from testifying." The marshal gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Miss Larson. You look about ready to collapse." "I'm Marshal Daniel Wilson, by the way." Delilah sank gratefully into the offered chair. "There's more," she said urgently. "The man who helped me escape Rutherford's men, Patrick Lawson, he's out there right now, leading 4 of Rutherford's riders away from town to give me time to reach you. He needs help." Marshal Wilson frowned, moving to the window to scan the streets outside. "Where exactly is he?" "South of town," Delilah said, rising to join him at the window. "He planned to lead them into the hills, then circle back." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "John," he called to a young deputy Delilah hadn't noticed before, "gather a posse. 4 men, good riders. We've got trouble brewing." The deputy hurried out, and Marshal Wilson turned back to Delilah. "Now, Miss Larson, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." For the next hour, Delilah recounted the events that had brought her to Socorro, witnessing Coleman's murder, her narrow escape from Rutherford's men, Patrick's intervention, and their journey through the wilderness. Marshal Wilson listened intently, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. When she finished, he nodded solemnly. "I'll take your official statement now, get it all down in writing, and then we'll arrange protection for you until the circuit judge arrives." "And Patrick?" Delilah pressed anxiously. "Your men, have they found him?" "Not yet," Marshal Wilson admitted. "But they're good trackers. If your friend is out there, they'll find him." The process of giving her official statement took another hour, during which Delilah found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to Patrick, wondering if he was safe, if he had successfully evaded Rutherford's men. She had just signed the last page of her statement when the office door burst open and the young deputy, John, rushed in, his face flushed with exertion. "Marshal," he said breathlessly, "we found him, the Lawson fella. He's been shot." Delilah's heart seemed to stop. "Is he?" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "He's alive," John assured her quickly, "but it's bad. Doc's with him now." Marshal Wilson was already reaching for his hat. "Where?" "Doc Sullivan's place," John replied. "We brought him straight there." Delilah was on her feet, moving toward the door before either man could stop her. "Take me to him," she demanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. The doctor's office was only a short distance from the marshal's, a neat white building with a sign proclaiming Sullivan Medical Practice hanging above the door. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and herbs, the front room serving as a waiting area with several chairs and a small desk. A door at the back of the room opened, and a balding man in a blood-stained apron emerged, his expression weary but professional. "Marshal," he nodded to Wilson, "I've extracted the bullet and stopped the bleeding. It was a close thing the shot missed his heart by less than an inch. But he's young and strong. With rest and proper care, he should recover. Can I see him? Delilah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor looked at her questioningly, then at the marshal, who nodded. She's with him, Wilson explained. He's sedated, the doctor cautioned. And very weak. Just a few minutes. Delilah followed the doctor into a small room at the back of the building. Patrick lay on a narrow bed, his skin pale against the white sheets, a thick bandage visible beneath the blanket covering his chest. His breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes closed in drugged sleep, fighting back tears. Delilah moved to his side, gently taking his hand in hers. His fingers were cool, but she could feel the steady pulse in his wrist, reassuring evidence of life. What happened? She asked the marshal, who had followed her into the room. How was he shot? Wilson's expression was grim. According to the men who found him, he led Rutherford's riders into a box canyon south of town. There was a firefight. 2 of Rutherford's men are dead, the other 2 fled. My posse found Patrick on the canyon floor, bleeding badly but still conscious. He asked about you before he passed out. Delilah pressed Patrick's hand to her cheek, no longer trying to hide her tears. He saved my life. Again. He's a lucky man, the doctor observed, checking Patrick's pulse. An inch to the left and we wouldn't be having this conversation. When will he wake? Delilah asked. Hard to say. I gave him laudanum for the pain. Could be a few hours, could be tomorrow, but he needs rest more than anything now. Reluctantly, Delilah allowed herself to be led from the room, with the doctor's promise that she could return later. Back in the waiting area, Marshal Wilson arranged for her to stay at the town's hotel under the protection of one of his deputies. You need rest too, he pointed out when she protested, leaving Patrick. And food, from the looks of it. I'll have someone fetch you the moment he wakes. Too exhausted to argue further, Delilah allowed herself to be escorted to the hotel, where a hot bath, clean clothes, and a proper meal awaited her. Despite her worry for Patrick, she fell asleep almost instantly, her body succumbing to days of stress and exertion. She was woken several hours later by a knock at her door. The deputy assigned to guard her stood outside, his expression reassuring. The doctor sent word, he said. Mr. Lawson is awake and asking for you. Delilah hurried back to the doctor's office, her heart racing with anticipation and concern. The doctor met her at the door, his expression cautiously optimistic. He's weak but lucid, he informed her. Don't tire him out. Patrick was propped up slightly on pillows, his face pale but his eyes alert. A smile spread across his face when Delilah entered, transforming his features despite his obvious pain. You made it, he said, his voice rough but strong. Thanks to you, Delilah replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and taking his hand. The marshal took my statement. It's official now, my testimony against Rutherford. Good, Patrick said, wincing slightly as he shifted position. That's good. You scared me half to death, Delilah chided gently, tears threatening again. When they said you'd been shot. Takes more than a bullet to stop me, Patrick replied, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Especially when I have something to live for. Their eyes met, an entire conversation passing between them without words. Patrick tugged lightly on her hand, drawing her closer until their foreheads touched. I meant what I said before, he murmured, about courting you properly when this is over. I'm holding you to that, Delilah whispered back, placing a gentle kiss on his lips. So you'd better heal quickly. Over the next week, Patrick's condition improved steadily under the doctor's care and Delilah's attentive presence. She spent most of each day at his bedside, reading to him, talking about their future, or simply sitting in companionable silence. Marshal Wilson kept them updated on developments. A telegram had been sent to the circuit judge, who had agreed to make Abiquiu his first stop on his rounds, arriving in just 3 days. Wilson himself would escort Delilah back to Abiquiu to testify, with a contingent of deputies to ensure her safety. And Rutherford? Patrick asked during one of the marshal's visits. Any sign of him trying to flee? Wilson shook his head. According to my sources, he's still at his ranch, acting as if nothing's amiss. Either he's very confident or he doesn't know we have Delilah's testimony safely recorded. He's arrogant, Patrick said. Always has been. Believes he's untouchable. Well, he's about to learn differently, Wilson replied grimly. Between Delilah's eyewitness account and the attempted murder of a federal witness that's you, Miss Larson, he's looking at the gallows. The day before they were scheduled to depart for Abiquiu, the doctor finally declared Patrick well enough to leave his care, though he warned against any strenuous activity for at least another week. No riding, no fighting, no lifting anything heavier than a dinner plate, he instructed sternly. That wound needs time to heal properly. What about traveling? Patrick asked, already dressed and clearly eager to be out of the sick room. By wagon, not horseback. The doctor considered this. If the road's not too rough and you're careful, it should be all right. But at the first sign of bleeding or increased pain, you stop and rest. Understood, Patrick nodded, though Delilah could tell from his expression that he would have agreed to almost anything to gain his freedom. Once outside, Patrick took a deep breath of fresh air, his face turning up to the sun. Never thought I'd be so happy just to see the sky, he commented. Delilah slipped her hand into his, smiling up at him. Where to now? The hotel. First, somewhere more private, Patrick replied, tugging her gently toward a small park at the end of the street. The park was deserted in the midday heat, the shade of a large cottonwood tree offering relief from the sun. Patrick led Delilah to a bench beneath its branches, sitting carefully to avoid aggravating his wound. There's something I need to ask you, he said, his expression serious. Something I've been thinking about during those long hours in that sick. Delilah's heart beat a little faster at his tone. What is it? Patrick took both her hands in his gray eyes intent on hers. When this is over after the trial, after Rutherford faces justice, I'm going to claim that land Thomas and I found. Build that ranch we planned. I know, Delilah said softly. You told me. What I didn't tell you, Patrick continued, is that I can't imagine doing it without you. I know it's fast, maybe too fast. We've known each other less than 2 weeks, but those weeks have shown me more about you, about your courage, your kindness, your strength than some people learn about each other in years. He paused, his thumbs tracing patterns on her palms. I'm not asking for promises now. Just a possibility. A chance to court you properly, as I said. And if, in time, you come to feel for me what I already feel for you, Delilah leaned forward, silencing him with a kiss that conveyed everything words could not. When they finally parted, she smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. Yes, she said simply. To all of it. The courting, the possibility, the future, yes. The journey back to Abiquiu the next day was long but uneventful. Marshal Wilson had arranged for a comfortable wagon for Patrick, whose wound was healing well but still required care. Delilah rode beside him, with the marshal and 4 deputies forming an escort around them. As they approached Abiquiu, Delilah felt a curious mixture of emotions: apprehension at the confrontation to come, satisfaction that justice would finally be served, and an unexpected nostalgia for the town that had been her home for the past year. They arrived late in the afternoon, the streets quieter than usual as word of their approach spread. Marshal Wilson led them directly to the town's small hotel, where rooms had been secured and additional deputies posted for security. "The judge arrives tomorrow," Wilson informed them as they settled in. "The trial will begin immediately. I've already arranged for all the witnesses to be present." "Including the shopkeeper's wife?" Patrick asked with a wry smile. "The one who helped Rutherford's men find us," Wilson nodded. "Mrs. Hatcher has agreed to testify that she was paid $50 to report your purchases and the direction you headed. She's not proud of it, but she's cooperating now to save her own skin." That evening, as they shared a private dinner in Delilah's room, deemed safer than the hotel's dining room, Patrick seemed unusually quiet, his expression thoughtful. "What's on your mind?" Delilah asked, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Patrick met her gaze, his eyes serious. "Tomorrow," he said, "seeing Rutherford in that courtroom, hearing the evidence against him, it's something I've worked toward for 3 years, dreamed about for longer. And now it's finally happening," Delilah said, understanding his mood. "Are you worried about the outcome?" Patrick shook his head. "With your testimony and the marshal's support, the outcome seems certain. No, I'm thinking about what it means to finally let go of the past, to stop defining myself by vengeance." "And what does it mean?" Delilah asked softly. A slow smile spread across Patrick's face, transforming his features. "Freedom," he said. "A future that's about building something, not tearing down. A life that's about more than the ghosts I've been chasing." "It sounds wonderful," Delilah said sincerely. "It does," Patrick agreed, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "Especially with the right partner beside me." The morning of the trial dawned clear and bright, the town of Abiquiu buzzing with anticipation. The circuit judge, a stern-looking man named Harrington with a reputation for fairness, had arrived the previous evening and would be presiding over proceedings in the town hall. By 9 o'clock, the improvised courtroom was packed with spectators, many standing along the walls due to limited seating. Delilah sat in the front row beside Patrick, with Marshal Wilson on her other side. Her heart was pounding, but she was determined to remain calm and deliver her testimony clearly. A stir at the back of the room announced the arrival of Samuel Rutherford, escorted by 2 deputies. Delilah turned, getting her first clear look at the man whose orders had nearly cost her life. Rutherford was older than she'd expected, perhaps in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He was expensively dressed and carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to power and deference. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room, narrowing slightly when they fell on Delilah and Patrick. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrington," the court clerk announced, and the room fell silent as the judge entered and took his place at the front. The trial proceeded with surprising efficiency. The charges against Rutherford were read: murder, attempted murder of a federal witness, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Rutherford pleaded not guilty to all counts, his voice strong and assured. The prosecution presented its case first, calling Delilah as their primary witness. She took the stand with steady steps, swore to tell the truth, and recounted in clear, precise terms exactly what she had seen that day by the disputed spring Samuel Rutherford shooting Marshal Coleman in the back during what appeared to be a heated argument. Rutherford's lawyer, a slick-talking man from Santa Fe, tried to discredit her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting she was too far away to identify Rutherford clearly, or that she had a personal grudge against the rancher. Delilah remained composed, answering each question truthfully and with dignity. Other witnesses followed Mrs. Hatcher, confirming she had been paid to report Patrick's purchases. One of Rutherford's former ranch hands, who testified to overhearing Rutherford order men to find the schoolteacher and silence her. And finally, Patrick himself. Despite his still healing wound, Patrick cut an impressive figure on the witness stand. His testimony about the ambush in the mountains and his own investigation into his brother's death, adding to the mounting evidence against Rutherford. By late afternoon, the prosecution had rested its case, and Rutherford's defense began. The rancher himself took the stand, denying all charges and claiming he was nowhere near the disputed spring on the day of Coleman's murder. But his alibi was weak, contradicted by several witnesses who placed him in the area at the time, and his explanation for why his men had pursued Delilah was unconvincing at best. As the sun was setting, Judge Harrington called a halt to proceedings, announcing that court would reconvene at 9 the following morning for closing arguments and his verdict. That night, back in the safety of the hotel, Delilah found herself unexpectedly emotional. "It's almost over," she said as she and Patrick sat together in the small parlor adjacent to their rooms. "After tomorrow, Rutherford will face justice, and we can begin our future." Patrick nodded, drawing her close to his side. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "Thomas would be proud of what we've accomplished." "Do you think he would approve?" Delilah asked. "Of us, I mean, of me." Patrick smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "He would adore you," he assured her. "Thomas always said I needed someone with spirit to keep me honest, someone with a kind heart to balance my rough edges." "I have rough edges of my own," Delilah pointed out with a smile. "Just enough to make things interesting," Patrick replied, his eyes warm with affection. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded than before, the entire town seemingly present to hear the verdict. Judge Harrington listened to closing arguments from both sides, his expression giving no hint of his leanings. Finally, after a brief recess to consider the evidence, he returned to deliver his verdict. "In the matter of the territory of New Mexico versus Samuel Rutherford, on the count of murder in the first degree, I find the defendant guilty," the judge declared, his voice filling the suddenly silent room. "On the count of attempted murder of a federal witness, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Rutherford stood rigidly, his face pale with rage as the judge continued. "Samuel Rutherford, you are hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead, said sentence to be carried out 1 week from today." The gavel fell with a sharp crack, and it was done. Justice for Marshal Coleman, for Thomas Lawson, and for all the others who had fallen victim to Samuel Rutherford's greed and violence. Outside the courtroom, in the bright sunshine of a New Mexico morning, Patrick pulled Delilah into his arms, heedless of the watching crowd. "It's over," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Really over." "And now we begin," Delilah replied, her eyes shining with tears of relief and joy. 1 month later, under a perfect blue sky, Patrick and Delilah stood hand in hand on a grassy hilltop overlooking a verdant valley. Below them, the framework of a house was taking shape, the beginnings of the ranch Patrick and Thomas had dreamed of building. "What do you think?" Patrick asked, his arm around Delilah's waist. "Will it do?" Delilah surveyed the land stretching before them, rolling pastures ideal for cattle, a stream providing fresh water year-round, mountains rising majestically in the distance. The beauty of it took her breath away. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "Everything you described and more." Patrick smiled, turning to face her fully. "There's just one thing missing," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small, worn box. Delilah's heart skipped a beat as he opened it, revealing a simple gold ring set with a single perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," Patrick explained, his voice soft with emotion. "I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right person to give it to." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Delilah Larson, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life, despite all the danger and drama that brought us together. You've shown me that there's more to life than vengeance, that there can be joy and peace even after the darkest times." Patrick dropped to one knee, the ring held between them like a promise. "I know it hasn't been long, but some things you just know in your heart. I love you, Delilah, and I want to spend the rest of my life building a home and a family with you. Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness spilled down Delilah's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Patrick Lawson, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and adventure together. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Patrick and Delilah were married in the newly completed ranch house, surrounded by friends who had become like family. Marshal Wilson came from Socorro, as did Dr. Sullivan, who had saved Patrick's life. Even Delilah's brother, James, and his family made the journey from Denver to celebrate the occasion. As they exchanged their vows beneath an arch of autumn flowers, Delilah thought of the strange, twisted path that had led her to this moment, from witnessing a murder to running for her life, from being hunted to finding love in the most unexpected circumstances. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and Patrick's kiss was a promise fulfilled, the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. The years that followed brought prosperity and joy to the Lawson Ranch. Patrick's knowledge of the land and animals, combined with Delilah's organizational skills and determination, made their venture a success. Within 5 years, they had one of the most respected cattle operations in the territory. But more precious than their material success was the family they created together. Their firstborn, a son they named Thomas in honor of Patrick's brother, arrived on a snowy winter night just a year after their wedding. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Emma, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's storm-gray eyes. On a warm summer evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the twilight, Delilah leaned her head against Patrick's shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she first came to New Mexico territory. "Happy?" Patrick asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Delilah replied, smiling up at the man who had once risked everything to save a stranger and had ended up saving both their futures in the process. "It's a good life we've built here." Patrick's arm tightened around her shoulders. "The best," he agreed, his voice warm with gratitude and love. "Worth every step of the journey that brought us here." As night fell over their land, bringing with it a blanket of stars and the promise of another day together, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that he was right. Every danger faced, every obstacle overcome had led them to this place of peace, and belonging a home built on love, courage, and the unshakable belief that justice, in the end, would prevail.